Hey guys, so yeah, you're getting this review a bit early because with Easter with me going to Easter dinner tomorrow, it's likely I'm not going to be able to get to the manga reviews tomorrow. That's going to be coming Monday, and so I figured I may as well at least bump this up to Saturday, at least for this week. But okay. Immediately upon following last week's episode, the Eden Zero crew pretty much find themselves in the worst case scenario, as following Dragon Joe outing them, they not so soon after find themselves facing Joe's elite, the Element 4, or at least one of them in the form of Laguna. And I do gotta say, upon revisiting the chapters adapted in this episode, I appreciate, one thing I appreciate now more than I did before is how quickly it wastes no time in showing that these are the stakes and this is the threat of Dragon Joe. That this is the kind of power power and influence Dragon Joe wields, and especially emphasizing just how much the crew does have their backs against the wall. And it's not just the Element 4 that are a problem, but even his lackeys, for as easy as they kind of got dusted in the beginning of the episode, it still showed just the fact that they were able to even infiltrate the ship at all is in itself impressive. Which granted, don't get me wrong, because the Zeros are shown, and obviously we know most, if not all, the main cast are going to prevail. But I will say, it's how the crew prevails over Dragon Joe, which makes Eden Zero particularly unique in my opinion, and I'll get into more detail when we reach that turning point, as it is going to require a bit of lengthy explanation. But to put it in simple terms for anime onlys, this isn't going to be a quick or easy encounter, at least not in favor of our heroes. You even pretty much see it in this episode. The crew is already kind of learning a few hard knock lessons before they taste victory. In fact, this is an episode where it is kind of rewarding to pay attention to the little details, like Shiki's very reckless behavior, learning how the ship Draken's lackeys invaded the Eden Zero with cut through its defenses, or even just flat out seeing how Dragon Joe can manipulate a situation with such ease. It's these little details that pile up and show how in over their heads the crew really is. If you're thinking this is kind of a situation where it's not just going to be about brute force it's not going to be just about brute force where they can simply bust through the wall and defeat Dragon Joe lickety split. No, it's going to require a little subterfuge, a little ingenuity, and just more than just brawn in order to outsmart and defeat Dragon Joe. This episode just kind of proves it overall, just with those little details. I'd argue they're learning what it is they've stepped into with the introduction of Laguna, Joe's designated element of water, which, yeah, slight spoiler I suppose, but as a manga reader, it is kind of funny looking back on this encounter and me being completely unaware of the larger role Mashima would carve out for him in the story. Granted, because Mashima admitted he only planned half the story, he probably didn't know either at the time, but it is interesting in retrospect. But now, as far as the fight itself goes, although there is still an underlying goofiness to Laguna's powers, just seeing him already having this huge advantage in being able to take out Shiki, Homura, and Pino with just such ease, without even batting an eye, without practically even batting an eye, it just makes you wonder how powerful the other three are going to be, and just what are you supposed to do to survive when your enemies are as powerful as someone like Laguna, which in this case, it does pay to be more deceptive like Weiss was being, but the fact that the fact that Weiss had to trick Laguna in the first place, it just further cements that it cements that the enemy we're facing isn't gonna be like a 1-2 shot victory like it was with I guess majority of the stuff in Fairy Tail. There is going to be a little bit more difficulty in taking out Dragon Joe. Now, with that said, this is an episode I do admit feels like the pacing slowed down a bit. Don't get me wrong, there was still a lot that happened, but it also feels like it kind of stopped short. We could have gotten just a little bit more. But knowing that this is probably going to be the longest arc in the season, they probably want to make it last as long as they can. Although, even under the circumstances, they can of how long they can feasibly make the Biogore arc, I think it'll only last like 14, maybe 15 episodes, which the more I think about it, does have me like reconsidering where this season is going to end, because the next 2 arcs after this aren't very long and can probably be adapted with 3 episodes each minimum. Maybe 4 in the case of the 3rd arc that's likely to get adapted into this season, but after even knowing that, it would still leave a bit of an empty... I'm trying to think it out of my head, and even thinking it out like that, it would still leave an empty space in my opinion. Not enough to adapt the next big arc after those other 2, but not at least not entirely anyway. And I know it sounds like a small detail to get hung up on so early in the season, but after this arc, like, the series goes full stop without many breaks in between. So how they end this season is kind of going to determine the pace for the rest of the series, because my assumption was it would end on the 2nd arc after Biogore, but now I'm not so sure anymore. Like, I don't know, something about this is just feeling a little iffy right now, and I can't fully explain it. It just, I don't know, the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm thinking that we might end up only... That it might be like adapting like 3 arcs and only like a chunk of an arc. I don't know. It's kind of weird. But okay. Now, getting back to the episode itself, though, one thing I didn't really appreciate. Getting back to the episode itself, though, one thing I didn't really appreciate about Joe that I do now, looking back is his philosophy on life that he espouses through his speech on his views of alchemy and the Four Elements. Now, putting aside whether or not he actually believes what he says or not, he definitely does, in his own twisted way, seem to believe that there's a balance to everything. Life and death, the elements, the powerful and the powerless. With Joe, it's almost as if he sees life itself as the scales that predetermines your role in the world. Now, again, it's probably likely he just uses this as a means to justify his cruelty and how he preys upon those who aren't powerful enough to oppose him. But at the same time, looking back as a manga reader is an interesting look into his psyche, and kind of provides a bit of a window into his history and his backstory, more than I realize, and why he's motivated the way he is, which I won't spoil, but it's a thing that, in my opinion, does make him one of the more relatable villains. Despite how cut and dry he's seeming right now, his backstory does make him kind of one of the more relatable villains Mashima has created, because he represents a fear basically everyone has, even if they won't admit it openly. But that's a discussion for another time. Last thing to mention, though, is also the episode that introduces the concept of the Starshine's battle dress, their combat mode essentially, through Witch confronting Draken's lackeys. And this is the part of the episode that I'm a little bit mixed on, because right out of the gate, and honestly, not even just the Witch versus Draken's lackey one, but also the Laguna versus Weiss part of it as well, because I'm a little bit mixed on these fights, because right out of the gate, I will say, artwork was on point in some respects, and in some respects they even made certain panels with Witch and Weiss even slightly better than they looked in the manga, and just through basically some simple camera shot choices. Like for example, that close up of Witch's face as she suffocates Maria, it's just as terrifying as it was in the manga. But with that said, I will also say, for as good as the art was, the animation itself felt like it was lacking, and the fight in the manga is so dynamic. And while there were small moments of that in this episode, it largely felt like they cut corners where they didn't need to, or just flat out didn't do anything to elevate the fights themselves. And honestly, it's stuff like this that I worry much more about than the censorship, because it gives the perception that the fights from the manga are flat and linear, and I know they probably cut these corners to make the more important fights and scenes look better, but I wish they just didn't cut corners at all. Like, I don't know, it just feels like a little like they're kind of wasting the potential of these fights, or I don't even know honestly what's going on behind the scenes with the budgeting of this series. I don't know, but it's like something needs to change. something needs to change in the art and animation at front of this thing. But with that said, guys, that's all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, Analyst Crunchyroll, be sure to notification bell, subscribe button, and just share the video around, guys. Dark Knight of Renee, signing off. Later, everyone.